Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the April 9th, 2024 State Land Board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we will start off this morning, and welcome to those who are watching us online. We're going to start off with the consent items, which would be the approval of the minutes from the February 13th board meeting. Do I hear a motion?
Sure, move approval of the minutes from the February 13th, 2024 meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I will second that motion. Am I allowed to do that? Yes. Okay, here we go. We don't have the Secretary of State with us today, although her staff person is here. So we have a motion to approve the minutes from the February meeting. Any objections? Seeing none, minutes are approved. Before we move into our action items, and we have several items and informational items, action items and informational items today, I was going to take the privilege of the chair. And we have several legislators with us this morning who wanted to say a few words about some items. And so what I thought we'd do is have them come up and briefly make some comments. And I say briefly, I love my former colleagues in the legislature, but we do have a long agenda. So I thought we would start off with Representative Gomberg and Senator Taylor. And I believe we also have Representative Boyce and Representative Deal with us. So all I would say is please introduce yourself for the record. And do we have Senator Taylor here? Online. Oh, you're online. Hello, Senator. Hello. There you are. Good morning. Representative Gomberg, would you like to start? And then we'll have.
Thank you very much, Governor, Mr. Treasurer, members of the board. David Gomberg from House District 10 here together with my good friend Senator Taylor to talk about abandoned and derelict vessels. And I appreciate the invitation to come here and provide a very quick update. As you'll recall, it's been about a year since we passed two pieces of legislation. One of them creating a designated fund to address this serious problem. And the second, providing some seed dollars to actually have some money to do the work. And I was very pleased to see those two bills pass, in particular because we've got a big and growing problem, and because we were addressing that problem by taking money out of the Common School Fund. I mean, think about that for a second, taking money out of the Common School Fund to deal with abandoned vessels. Well, now we've got a fund, we've got money, and we're getting the work done. So we're moving in a positive direction. And I just appreciate the chance to come here and thank you for your cooperation and your attention to that. And I'll turn my brief remarks over to Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Representative Gomberg. Senator Taylor.
Thank you. Good morning. And good morning to you, Governor, and to Treasurer Reed. And I will say I really support and thank the work that Representative Gomberg that he's done, that we've been able to work together. And this is really a bipartisan issue. And I don't need to tell anybody here the seriousness of the problem around abandoned and derelict vessels. And we do need to have a more concentrated effort. These are great first steps. Yes, they're wonderful. However, we need obviously more funds. We need things to happen at a more aggressive pace. And I really would just like to go ahead and encourage this work to happen rapidly. Our beautiful, beautiful state, I don't know that we're removing boats faster than they are becoming abandoned and derelict. I'm not sure what the data on that is, but representing a district of all of the inner southeast, therefore along the Willamette, and of course, Governor Kotek, your former district of north up there on the Willamette and all along the Columbia, is also really experiencing this. And so I just want to encourage us to continue to do some more work, but maybe, anything that we can do to work together to get more funds and to work at a faster pace in order to address this and hold those who are accountable for abandoning their boats. That's another big issue, but that's a subject for another time. So thank you, and I will let you go on with your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Taylor, and Representative Gomberg and Senator Taylor. Thank you for your advocacy. I do agree the abandoned and derelict vessel issue is very bipartisan, and we all agree it should not be money from the Common School Fund. And we look forward to the conversation in the next legislative session on particularly holding, the property owners more accountable than we are, as well as cleaning up the problem. So thank you very much for both of you for being here. And then with that
time and your courtesy.
You are welcome. Representative Boyce, Representative Deal.
Well, thank you and good morning all, Governor, Treasurer Reed, Appreciate the time. I got up pretty early this morning to get here. Didn't anticipate being able to visit with you, but I promised your staff I would take just a couple of minutes. I sent a letter into you.
One more,
Oh,
just,
Court-
name,
Sorry.
name for the record. Thank you.
I somehow always forget that. Curt Boys, State Representative District 1, Coos Curry, and Douglas counties. Again, thank you for the welcome. I sent a letter out that just barely made the 10 o'clock deadline yesterday. My wife said it was a great letter, but my phone has definitely not rang off the hook on how good it is, but the last 24 hours. But it is about the Elliott State Forest, and that's in my district. And Coos and Douglas counties both have exceptional forest programs, and so do the three tribes that have direct heritage involvement to the Elliott, the 90,000 acres that we're all very proud of. My entire time as a 6-year commissioner was battling gigantic, what I sometimes call nuclear fires. And that's included in this letter. And we have had 11 in the last 37 years. It's no exaggeration to remind everyone in our state that just in my county alone, that's been almost $500 million to fight. And because we've not been able to harvest the burned timber, there's no money for reforestation. Land of the Wild Rivers, some of the most, if maybe the most scenic, pristine rivers in the North American continent. I'd hope in battle that they have comparable rivers, but we'll take on that discussion anytime. So the watersheds are damaged. We lose millions of critters, wildlife that our local folks are quite disheartened by. And so getting back to the devastation of the fires, that's the biggest concern I have with the Elliott. And if we don't manage well, or if we get in a controversy that there's the ways that it's been done in Curry County, primarily by the federal government, there's no way to measure the devastation. And it continues and continues and continues. It really has hurt our fish population. And many of you have worked on fish recoveries your entire careers. So I'll conclude with this, if I may. I have 5 basic requests that I'm bringing before you today. And again, thanks for letting me last minute testify. Number 1, clear the underbrush and ladder fuels. Number 2, and I could elaborate on all these, but you know what I'm referring to, so I won't. Number 2, sell 50 additional million board feet of the 70 million that it grows every single year. Number 3, document all 550 miles of the Elliott roads and trails. Number 6, please consider taking essential additional time to design and develop this plan. I'm asking you not to make a decision today. And finally, and I get smiles on this, but this is from a couple Native American friends of mine, said, why don't we take a certain portion, a reasonable portion of the 80 to 90,000 acres and make it a state park? And that can be funded by the harvest of some of the timber there. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for being here and representing your community. It's good to see you. And Representative Deal. And just announce yourself for the record, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Governor, Treasurer Reed, and the rest of the trustees. My name is Ed Deal, the state representative for House District 17, East Salem through the majestic Santiam Canyon. And I would like to read a letter that I submitted earlier. So I wrote to express concern about the process for implementing a new governance structure for the Elliott State Research Forest, as outlined in the April 2nd proposal by the Department of State Lands. I object to the expedited timeline imposed for adopting the ESRF's governance structure. The April 2nd notice called for a decision by April 9th, and this severely limits meaningful public engagement. Such a short time frame for such a significant decision prevents people and organizations from preparing thoughtful input or alternative proposals. I ask for a more inclusive and transparent decision-making process so all stakeholder voices can be heard. As an example of why a pause might be helpful, the State Land Board should take the time to consider the revised bylaws for the ESRF Board of Directors as proposed in Appendix A of Dr. Dave Sullivan's letter from the Oregon Advocates for School Trust Lands. I want to ensure ESRF's board is filled with people who have experience in forest science and active forest management. It would also ensure the board operates independently of political influence, aligning with the need for science-led research forests. I really want to see the Elliott be a science and education research forest. I urge the State Land Board to reconsider the current process for adopting the DSL's proposed governance structure and to give due consideration to alternative governance structures. Such a reconsideration would represent a significant step toward a more effective and scientifically driven approach to manage the Elliott, benefiting the broader interests of Oregon forests and communities. We also urge the Land Board simply, let's delay this approval of the management proposal to allow more time for input from citizens of Oregon. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Deal. Thank you for taking time with us this morning. We appreciate that. And with that, really appreciate our elected leaders joining us. We will move on to our action items. Action item number 2, we are talking about the South Slough. So with that, Madam Director.
Thank you, Governor, Mr. Treasurer, and Ms. Ventura. Yes, we are talking about the South Slough, which you are going to see in August. I'm so excited. So I have on the screen Patricia Fox, the new manager of the South Slough. Dr. Yednock moved on to other employment, a dream job for her, working to protect the environment all around the world. And so Patricia Fox used to work here in this office, and it was a competitive process. And she has been situated now at the South Slough for about a little over a month. What we have before you today is whether the Land Board should authorize the due diligence to support the acquisition of 2 properties in Coos County, totaling 113 acres, to increase the lands of the South Slough Reserve and, most importantly, protect those habitats. The authorities are set out below, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Fox to go through the agenda item for you.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Patricia Fox, and I am the new reserve manager for the South Slough National Research Reserve. And it's a pleasure to be here, Governor Kotek, Mr. Treasurer, and members of the board. As Director Walker stated, this agenda item is to seek the authorization to do due diligence to support the acquisition of 2 different properties that are currently owned by Coos County. The first property is known as the Deal property, which you can see in your packet and on the screen. Excuse me. This area is about a rectangle shape and is about 100 acres. And what makes this particular property of interest to the reserve is it is the only suitable spawning habitat for coho salmon in the local watershed. So it would be very important to the reserve to be able to acquire this property. It also supports habitat for lamprey and the marble murrelet. So protecting this critical habitat for these threatened and endangered species in perpetuity would be very important to the reserve. The second property is known as the Triangle property, which you can also see on the screen and in your packet. And this consists of 13 acres. And this property is of interest to the reserve because it will improve access to the reserve, and it will also prevent future timber harvests on lands that are directly adjacent to the current boundaries of the reserve. Coos County is interested in selling both of these properties to the reserve by conducting a appraisal using Yellow Book appraisal value. And South Slough staff did meet with the Coos County commissioners in January of this year and agreed that a Yellow Book appraisal value will be used for both properties. In your packet, there's also a support letter from the Coos County commissioners. We've also been working with our 3 tribal nations to ensure that we have the support from the Siletz, Tsi, Klutsi, and Coquel tribes, which we do to acquire this property. The reserve had actually started some due diligence to acquire this property in conjunction with the Wild Rivers Land Trust. Back in 2022, the reserve had received a capacity building funding from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to complete preliminary due diligence. At that time, though, we did not acquire full funding to proceed with that acquisition and due diligence, but we have been ranked in a proposal very favorably. And so we submitted a full grant proposal to NOAA in February of this year through the bipartisan infrastructure law funding for the purchase and restoration of the properties. We will know if we acquire that funding in probably June of this year. So the proposal is to continue or to really continue that preliminary due diligence to eventually acquire both of these properties. And if we are successful in the grant award, we would come back before you all in the land board, likely in late of 2025, early 2026, for approval to complete the acquisition and transfer the property into the reserve. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fox, and welcome to your new role at the South Slough. We're glad to have you. Questions for the director or Ms. Fox? Not seeing any from the treasurer. I would only say that really want to thank the Coos County Board of Commissioners and the tribe's involvement and just the approach taken here. I think there's a real opportunity here, and obviously we'll have to see how it rolls out in terms of funding from the federal government, but real opportunities here. Madam Director, do you have any other items before I move
Just
to?
make the recommendation in support of this agenda item, and we're very excited about it. The department recommends the State Land Board authorize the reserve, working through the Department of State Lands Real Property Program, to complete due diligence work in support of the acquisition of these properties in Coos County.
Thank you, Director Walker. Do we have a motion for the recommendation?
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation, the authorization for the reserve to complete due diligence and support acquisition of these properties.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'll second that. Any discussion or objection? No objections? Not seeing any. Motion is approved. And that was action item two.
Now we're on 3.
We're moving on to, let's see, moving on to action item number 3.
Thank you.
Director Walker.
The issue here is whether the State Land Board should initiate permanent rulemaking to simplify how the department calculates rental rates for leases, adjust the application fee structure to cover department expenses, amend or change financial assurance requirements, and clarify the initial term of a lease. And for those following on the screen, it is page 15 of your document. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to Deputy Director Bill Ryan, who is joining us from the great state of Texas, and he can go through this item. And I'll say at the outset, this has nothing to do with the undersea cables. Those are easements, and these are leases. So be looking for the undersea cable issue as we go into the session and hopefully get some permission to change that. So, Bill?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, I love it when the technology works. Good morning, Governor Kotek and Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Bill Ryan. I'm Deputy Director of Operations here at the Department of State Lands. To give a little bit of background, the people of Oregon own the beds and banks of all navigable and tidally influenced waterways throughout the state. And Oregon-owned rivers, lakes, and the territorial sea are shared resources that the public may use and enjoy for navigation, recreation, commerce, and fishing. And so the department oversees use of these Oregon-owned waterways, keeping them healthy and safe while promoting responsible waterway uses. Marinas, ports, floating homes, docks, and other uses of public waterways require authorization from the department. Some authorizations, including leases and registrations, compensate the public for use of the waterways and ensure the use does not negatively affect the health and safety of public lands or waters. In recent years, the department has explored strategies to achieve sustainable operations in managing waterway leases. Some of these strategies did not require rulemaking and have been implemented, such as clarifying use of land costs and lease rates and adding new lease requirements for vessels reporting and site inspections. However, there's some additional opportunities to achieve sustainable operations and really looking at reducing the risk of funding coming from the Common School Fund in order to support the state-owned waterways management program. In 2018, the department partnered with the Portland State University's Center for Public Service Fellowships program to review our funding mechanisms and to make some recommendations about improvements. And so those recommendations are listed in the agenda item as well as in the attached study that is attached with your packet. The department plans to really simplify the way the rules are calculated, come up with efficiencies there, as well as look at equity, a better equity in terms of how folks are charged for the use of the public's waterways and the associated banks. And so through the rulemaking process, the department seeks to simplify those rates, ensure that we have that equitability, as I talked about, tie the fee and rate increases to a private index to the extent that we can do that, and to use clear and simple language where the current rule language is very confusing or complex. If you've ever had a chance to look at those rules, you'll know what I'm talking about there. We also want to clarify the initial term of a lease and require additional financial insurance for registrations and more certifications as appropriate. As part of our regular rulemaking process, we'll develop or convene a rulemaking advisory committee representing those who are likely to be affected by the rule, and to review and provide input on the proposed rule language and development of the notice of the proposed rulemaking and an evaluation of the fiscal impact. We're also going to gather input on the proposed rule language through a public comment period, and we'll hold at least one public hearing. The department will take into consideration public comment, input from the RAC, and input from other local and state agencies, tribal governments, and affected stakeholders to determine the final proposed rule language, which will go to the land board for adoption at a future meeting. And so the recommendation is that the land board authorize the department to initiate permanent rulemaking for administrative rules under OAR 141-082, governing the management of and issuing of licenses and registrations for structures on and uses of state-owned submerged and submersible land. So thank you. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Director Ryan. Thank you for being with us. Director Walker, any other comments before we take questions?
I would just say that the report that we had done was in 2018, and it's still valid today. We just had issues in terms of a lot on our plate, and then COVID came and we weren't able to do all this, but now it's time to get it done and get it done right. And so we're really excited about getting underway with this. And I appreciate Deputy Ryan taking time from his vacation. He was visiting family and seeing the eclipse. So he took the day off to attend to business here, and I appreciate his time.
Thank you, Director Walker. And I hope you had a good view of the eclipse, Deputy Director.
Thank you, Governor. It was wonderful.
Glad to hear that. And I do say that for those of folks who are reading all the materials, the appendix that shows the waterway leasing study, it's if you want to get wonky, it's a really good read, and it's a very helpful analysis of how we've been doing business and how we can just make things simpler for folks.
We ended up hiring the young woman who did that because she was so awesome, and she stayed with us a couple of years, and now she works for Metro, unfortunately, but very sharp young woman.
Yeah, these summer fellowship programs are pretty amazing. Mr. Treasurer, any questions?
No questions, Madam Chair. I would just echo the appreciation for getting back to this priority. Obviously, the distractions and disruptions of COVID and everything else, but I really appreciate the goals here around simplification and making sure that structures are equitable and fair and covering costs. We heard that earlier when it comes to abandoned derelict vessels, and that's a priority here as well, I know.
I agree with that, Mr. Treasurer.
Motion made.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Move approval of the recommendation and the authorization to initiate rulemaking as described.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'll second that motion. Any objections? Seeing none, motion passes. And we will move on to the next item, agenda item number 4. Stevens.
Stevens Road. I feel like this is my legacy project here at the department. I'm so pleased with this. And Governor, we're going to build those houses that you're looking for. So let me state before I get started, we have Robert Underwood on the screen in case we need him from DAS Real Estate Services. Again, Robert used to work for us and went back to DAS, but he's been very involved in Stevens Road, and we actually continue to work with him. And then also the city planner for the city of Bend, Damian Ciernek, I think I pronounced that correctly. is here if you have any questions. And as we go through this item, you'll see that they have done a robust process of development of Stevens Road. Couldn't be more pleased. So the issue here today is whether the State Land Board should authorize the department to sell the remaining 261 acres of the Stevens Road tract in a brokered transaction. And the authorities are all set out below. And the background is the department partnered with the city of Bend on implementation of House Bill 3318 in 2021. That established a two-step process for incorporation of the 261 acres into Bend's urban growth boundary. The goal is development of a mixed-use community, which includes affordable housing. The first step in that whole entire process was creation of a concept plan to determine what could be developed on the tract. And then the second step required detailed studies to confirm the concept plan could work, as well as approval of the land use language that would control the development. The department is delighted to share with you that Bend City Council met on February 21, 2024, and completed the second step, thereby incorporating the tract into the UGB. So we're ready to go. In April 2022, the Land Board approved the department supporting incorporation of the tract into the Bend UGB by writing a letter to the Department of DLCD. And that was all part of the bill, the House bill, that was part of the agreement. And so now we seek approval for the 261 acre sale. So the city of Bend is seeking to add much needed housing with this expansion. Work to date included deed restricted towards the eventual development of a complete community. And what that means is deed restricted affordable housing, market rate housing, as well as parks and areas for mixed and commercial uses. The development will also have transportation options for walking, biking, and transit use. To ensure development of affordable housing, the House Bill 3318 requires 20 acres of those lands to be deed restricted for the use of households that make less than the area median income. The city of Bend is responsible for that development. In an innovative approach, and this is the part that I get goosebumpy, tied to the Common School Fund's mission to support public education, and I want to thank our esteemed DOJ counsel, Matt DeVore, for his exquisite help on helping me get to this point, because we had a lot of conversation with legislators over this. But 7 of those 20 acres are going to be made available to the extent permitted by law in a manner that gives a priority to households in which at least one individual is employed by an education provider. These 7 acres will be provided to the city of Bend at no charge. If the city of Bend, however, cannot meet this requirement within 10 years of receiving title to the final parcel of land, they will then have to pay market price for the land based on an assessment at the time of transfer. And all of this is, I wanted incentive for the city of Bend to hold to this provision. So if the market rate, of course, will be higher than the charge for the other 13 acres. If the city does not buy back the land, they have 10 years to make this happen. And if they don't buy back the land, that 7 acres reverts to the department, to the Common School Fund for the benefit of all children. And Matt worked with me so hard on that provision. I just can't say enough about it. So the agreed upon price the city will pay for those 13 acres is $35,000 per acre. Pursuant to the direction outlined in House Bill 3318, the city of Bend developed the Stevens Road Tract Concept Plan. Work on that plan began in October of 2021, and here we are in April of 2024. So they spent a lot of time. The City of Bend Planning Commission and City Council approved that plan in the spring of 2022, leading to approval by Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development before a July 1, 2022 deadline. So then they come back for the next step. which is to develop planning amendments for the city's comprehensive plan based on the concept plan. But before finalizing these standards, the city completed a series of studies of the tract, including utility availability, transportation impacts, and a natural resource survey. These studies, alongside that tremendous community outreach, showed the proposed plan was viable. The policies adopted into the City of Bend's comprehensive plan will require the tract to be developed as that mixed-use community, providing all those connected streets and multi-use path network. And here's where you're going to be excited, Governor. Over 2,400 new housing units at a mix of densities and income levels, and at least 39 acres of parks and open space. That's awesome. I'm so excited. The Stevens Road tract is located east of Bend near the intersection of 27th Avenue and Stevens Road. The department acquired that land. You probably are asking, how did we get that land? The original 643 acre tract came from the Bureau of Land Management in 1997. To partially satisfy the federal government's obligation to provide Oregon with the remaining acres of federal land owed in lieu of school lands not granted at statehood. We're still looking for another 1,500 acres, and we're closing in on that. But for now, we got this land, and in 2016, the western 382 acres of the property were brought into the city's urban growth boundary through the regular processes. And these acres were then sold by the department 4 years later in 2020 for $22 million. And that's what we're developing. That's what they're developing now. And now we're going to add to that. So due to the unusual path that brought this tract into the City of Bend and the detailed development standards, including that requirement to transfer affordable housing parcels to the City of Bend, the department plans to engage a real estate broker. And we are going to use the same real estate broker we use for the first sale. DAS has Department of Administrative Services has a list of approved brokers that we can choose from. And Cushman & Wakefield is on that list. So we chose them because they did a great job before. Once that value is determined, the broker will carry out a broad marketing program to ensure awareness of the parcel and invite offers. And actually, my understanding is that appraisal has been done. The department it says a marketing period of between 3 and 6 months will likely be followed by an extended buyer due diligence period to allow confirmation that the buyer's intentions for the tract align with the city's requirements. The community of Bend, they're not going to want to see someone come in and try to do something different. So over the past 2.5 years, the City of Bend has completed extensive public involvement. And you can see on page 4 of the item, all of the open houses and the work sessions and the public hearings they had. And our city planner can chime in if he feels like he would like to add to that. But I think we've done all we need to do. I would recommend at this time that the State Land Board authorize the department to sell the remaining 261 acres of the Stevens Road tract through that brokered transaction. And I would invite the city planner, Damian Cernak, to testify if you would like to add anything. Did I miss anything?
Thank you, Director Walker, and good morning, Governor Kotek and Treasurer Reed. My name is Damian Cernak. I'm a senior planner with the city's Community and Economic Development Department. And, the good answer is no. I think Director Walker provided a very good background on all the work we've done together as a team between the city and the Department of State Lands. And I'm really here this morning to see if you have any questions I can answer for you.
Thank you, Mr. Cernak, and thank you to everyone at the City of Bend for their hard work on this. Director Walker, would you like to make the recommendation?
Yes, the department recommends the State Land Board authorize the department to sell the remaining 261 acres of the Stevens Road tract through a brokered transaction.
Thank you, Director Walker. Mr. Treasurer?
Madam Chair, just one comment, which is intended really as a compliment. My initial read of the recommendation caused me to kind of take a second look because there's a lot behind this that is not reflected in the recommendation. But I think that the conciseness of the recommendation really just reflects the work that has led to that point. So it is possible to be that concise, knowing all of the supporting work that's behind it, the structure and the detail that's led to this point. So with that, I'm happy to recommend approval of the recommendation and the authorization for the department to sell 261 acres Stevens Road tract through the broker transaction.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'll second that motion. Before we finalize the motion, I also want to echo that the amount of work that went into this, and when you read the addition to the comp plan for the area and the effort to get this right, it becomes a model for future conversations. So I just, again, want to thank everyone who's been involved in this, from Representative Krupp in his early days with the legislation to where we are today. This is a transformational opportunity for the city of Bend, and it's very exciting. So thank you.
And Governor and Mr. Treasurer, the model is also providing the housing to the educator housing. It's not been done anywhere else in the state. So not only have we set this in motion to hopefully have other communities copy, but the city of Bend has just done such a tremendous job. And you're right, the comprehensive plan was in your notebook as the attachment B, I believe. Yeah. And it was amazing what they've been able to do. So very proud that we are a part of this.
Agreed. And a guidance for the future for other communities. So are there any objections to the motion? Seeing none, motion is approved. Thank you, everyone. Very exciting. We'll move on to item number 5.
Okay, item number 5. Oh, this is exciting as well. The issue here is whether the State Land Board should approve decertification of the remaining 1,920 acres of forest lands known as Sun Pass within the Klamath District to reduce costs to the Common School Fund. The authorities are set out below, and our forester Ryan Singleton is on the screen, and also one of the deputies from the department, Mike, is here. I forget there's 2 mics, are here from ODF if you have any questions. So this is interesting because you'll get a little historical background. For several decades, the Oregon Department of Forestry has managed and sustainably harvested Department of State lands, certified forest lands on behalf of DSL. Approximately 28,100 acres of DSL lands are currently classified as certified, meaning they are primarily suitable for growing timber and other forest products, and they're properly managed by ODF. Timber harvest and other sales of forest products generate revenue for the Common School Fund. Certified forest lands cost approximately $40 per acre annually to manage. The financial performance of certified forest lands is impacted by parcels that are not capable of producing reliable, long-term timber revenue, but still contribute to annual management costs. Decertification of ODF managed forest land parcels is one option DSL considers when costs of management exceed long-term revenues. So DSL would take over land management, reducing overall costs of the forest, as those overhead expenses associated with ODF's management is no longer necessary. Historically, 21% of our certified forest lands were in ODF's Klamath District. There were 2 large blocks of certified forest land in the Klamath District known as Sun Pass and Yannick's Butte. Did I get that right? Mike Yannick's. And in August of 2022, the State Land Board approved the decertification of all of Yannick's Butte and 1,743 acres of Sun Pass. And there were 1,920 acres remaining. And the reason we didn't decertify them all at the time is that ODF had some planned timber sales, and we wanted to complete those. So although the district historically has produced an average of 903,000 board feet of timber volume annually between 2010 and 2020, it had the lowest return compared to other districts. So ODF has been managing these forest lands effectively, as I indicated. However, between 2017 and 2021, the Klamath District produced less than $60,000 in annual revenue, yet it cost us nearly $200,000 a year to manage. So that didn't make a lot of sense. These costs, of course, included direct variable expenses for on-the-ground management and those indirect fixed costs that we are charged by ODF, appropriately so. Revenues for these forest lands have been low, primarily due to poor timber markets, low value species mix, and low volume per acre harvest. In addition to low productivity, these forest lands also have few near-term harvest opportunities. So upon completion of this decertifying process, the department expects to save the Common School Fund up to $200,000 in costs annually, having little effect on the revenue. And if decertified, we'll take over management. We do have a forester, excellent forester, Ryan Singleton, and he will manage these largely for forest health and fuels reduction to thin to mitigate for wildfire risk, basically is what we're going to be doing there. The management needs are expected to occur about once a decade, and costs associated with these treatments will be minimal. Ryan is unable to get online due to internet issues because he's out in the forest today. Okay. The single fixed expense that would remain for the department upon transfer of management of the forest land parcels is annual fire protection costs for wildfire response provided by the Klamath Lake ODF Fire Protection District, as well as required by law. So the proposed transfer is in two separate decertification processes. The first decertification, as I mentioned, took place in 2023, and ODF's management obligations are complete for the remaining 1,920 acres that are before you today, and it's now ready. The process requires approval of the State Land Board. So once you all approve the decertification, then it goes to the Oregon Board of Forestry and for approval. And I've been told that's on their agenda for the June meeting. So let me talk just a minute about certification and decertification. The statutes don't use those words. They just say designated. So I had this conversation with Mr. DeVore yesterday and Mr. Singleton. So somewhere in the decades since the statutes were created, the determination has been made to call them certified and decertified. Can't point to you anywhere where, but that's how we term them. So everyone knows what we're talking about. Someday the statute might get changed, but so far we just designate them as certified and decertified. So our recommendation for you today is the department recommends that the State Land Board approve decertifying the remaining 1,920 acres of the Sun Pass Tract within the Oregon Department of Forestry's Klamath District to be effective July 1, 2024, which follows the June Board of Forestry meeting. That was a lot.
Thank you, Director Walker. Any questions about this? Mr. Treasurer?
Madam Chair, I think if I'm understanding it correctly, the question of certification, decertification is related to the purpose of a given area of forest and the timing and so on. So during my time on the land board, all we've heard about is decertification, I think. Is there a circumstance where we might be hearing about recertifying as circumstances might change?
We could. I don't think it means it's permanent. It just means for now, we think it's appropriate. But if some forest that we decertified comes back gangbusters and we don't have the ability to manage it and harvest it, we would look to ODF again. I know that we decertified some up in the Hood River District last year, I think, and we're actually doing quite well there. But it doesn't mean you can't reverse the process. And Mr. DeVore might answer that. Did I say that correctly? You got it.
Matt DeVore for Department of Justice. I think that's absolutely correct. The only thing I would add is that if in lieu lands or other lands are acquired for the Common School Fund, those could then be certified as well, which would be another way that lands could become certified.
Exactly. Thank you.
So your description that Mr. Singleton is going to be managing these lands for wildfire risk mitigation and so on. Beyond that, are there additional plans or ambitions for these?
And now for these forest lands don't produce much anymore. Mike, do you want to add anything to that? Would you agree? Come on up. He knows these lands very well.
I think she wants you to agree with a few more words.
Good morning, Governor Kotek, Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Mike Wilson. I serve as the State Forest Division Chief. Yes, I mean, it will be quite a while before they're productive again. These are low value forests generally. Once they have established mature ponderosa pine, white fir species like that, which they will grow into eventually. In the meantime, though, you're just basically having costs on those lands until that time. The only other factor that I would put in there is climate change. We don't know how that's going to affect productivity across the region and globally, quite frankly. But east side parcels are more at risk in a lot of ways.
Mr. Wilson, particularly appreciate that point about the long range planning. That's the point of the land board. So appreciate that.
They're pretty slow growing on that side of the mountains.
They are. And those lands were all inherited in a pretty much high graded condition, I might add. They were, formerly, at least the Board of Forestry, the gray that you see in the slide there. And I think a lot of the surrounding lands as well. I'm not sure the Common School land history on the ownership, but they were acquired from a private timber company that had high graded them. And so really it's been kind of a forest rehab project all along, similar to the Gilchrist.
Thank you very much.
Spoken like a forester, which I'm not. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Treasurer, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation that the decertification proceeds of 1,820 acres of the Sun Pass Tract in the Klamath District effective July 1st, 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I'll second that. Is there any objection to that motion? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you all. We'll move on to item number 6. And so this is on this particular item, we do have we did receive some written testimony that we have received. We have at least one individual who has signed up to testify. So what we're going to do is present the item. Then I'll take one piece of public testimony and then have some discussion. So, Dr. Walker.
Okay, great. Thank you, Governor, Mr. Treasurer. I'm always happy to talk about the Elliott. I heard that in the background, Peggy. Well, the issue before you today on the Elliott, we always have lots of issues. It's such a big forest. Whether the State Land Board should adopt the oversight structure in Appendix A for the State Land Board and Department's administration of the Elliott State Research Forest. The authorities are set out below. Brett Brownscombe, our Elliott State Research Forest Transition Director, has joined me at the table. And also, during our presentation, Melissa Cribbins is on the screen, and she's a member of the advisory group and will be giving a little bit of testimony about the advisory group's position on all of these details in the oversight structure. So let me say that we've been working to advance the Land Board's direction for the creation of the Elliott State Research Forest and making excellent progress on the 2024 work plan that we presented to you all in February. We've been working to advance the land board's direction, and the agenda today includes both this action item and which is consideration of an oversight structure for the Elliott, and an informational item, which is a status update on individual work plan items. Before we begin discussion of the oversight structure, which is on your screen, and I will say that we placed at your desk this morning a revised draft, and we have on the screen now the in red the changes that were made. I would call these Scrivener's additions. This section that you're looking at, and Brett's going to go through each individual section, but that section you're looking at is the largest change, and that was just something we forgot to put in the first time. So Brett will go over those. And so before we get into that, I do want to say the 2024 legislative session, we did get an allocation of $4 million for Elliott Management and Operations. That was transferred over from the authority that did not come to fruition. These funds are critical to advancing the Elliott State Research Forest, particularly actively managing the forest beyond basic maintenance. I also want to note my appreciation for the land board's clear direction. I love clear direction because then I don't have to make assumptions regarding establishment of the Elliott State Research Forest and support of the elements that many diverse interests agreed upon as the foundation for the research forest. Having that strong foundation has helped us adapt for DSL's management of the forest with ongoing engagement and incorporation of input, all the while continuing toward the widely shared vision of a research forest. And I even heard that earlier today from legislators. The oversight structure before you is essential to that path forward. The structure frames the research forest mission, management policies, and responsibilities for decision-making, which is really great. Such an oversight structure also ensures public transparency and accountability, as well as engagement in the research forest future, which has always been key components for public trust in management of this publicly owned forest. And I also want to make note that I have we're asking for approval of the oversight structure today only. That's the only thing we're asking from you today. In June, we will bring you back a potential board that we have vetted, and we have done a lot of robust research and invitation for people to apply to be on the board. So we will be doing that in June. And then you'll also be voting on the forest management plan later this summer as well. So today, this is all we're working on. And I will say that we've had 4 public meetings of the advisory group. Those are all open to the public. I know people in this room have been on those meetings, and we have discussed this oversight structure at all of those meetings. So none of this has been done anywhere but in the public eye. So I'm just going to state that right from the outset. The advisory group we convened, which is the leftover ESRF advisory group that started with us 6 years ago, and have remained, those that have remained, they've helped guide our work on this structure, as well as Brett Brownscombe. And I'm going to have Brett walk through that information now. The advisory group input identified what I would characterize, as I said before, those Scrivener revisions for clarity, and DSL's recommendation is the land board adopt the revisions. You'll be hearing from Ms. Cribbins as soon as I have Brett go over the details, and then we'll have some public comment. So unless you have questions of me, I'll turn it over to Brett now. You want your...
Okay. Thank you, Director Walker and Governor Kotek and Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Brett Brownscombe. I use the pronouns he, him, and his, and I'm the current serving Elliott State Forest Transition Director for the department. So what I wanted to start with is at a high level before getting into the changes for you on the screen. The oversight structure document before you today is, like Director Walker said, just an oversight structure document. It's important for several reasons that we shall get into, but there seems to have been maybe a little confusion in the public comments that we were adopting a management plan today, which we are not asking you to consider. We are still in the process of developing that. We'll cover that in the next agenda item on informational updates, but this is not a management plan decision before you. And I just wanted to note that, given some of the input. There's still a lot to go on that with public engagement. So the oversight structure before you today is attached as Appendix A to your meeting materials. The overall intentions around this structure are to set forth for the land board, for the department, for other governments, for research entities, other governments, including tribes, and then also the broader public, to set forth the overarching mission and management policies according to which the Elliott State Research Forest would be managed, and according to which it would also be overseen. And then the second purpose is to articulate an oversight structure for the research forest, including the creation of a new board of directors for the Elliott State Research Forest. And a third is to clearly indicate the respective roles and responsibilities of each of the main oversight entities, the land board, state land board, the department, and the Elliott board in the context of oversight. The department feels the adoption of the proposed structure is especially important in light of a few factors. One being this is state public land and a proposed public research forest. The second being that the desire to provide clarity relevant to the state's interests in broader partnerships tied to the research forest, whether with research entities, tribal governments, and indigenous interests, or local and statewide entities, other state and federal agencies, or others. And then the intent to ensure public transparency, accountability, and engagement pathways in the Elliott State Research Forest future. So the structure before you is based on the roles and responsibilities that were advanced legislatively and supported in 2022 through Senate Bill 1546, adapted here based on a few things. One is the reality of, we're operating within the current land board and DSL legal authorities and no longer operating under Senate Bill 1546. The second factor is the department, not a newly created state agency or Oregon State University, serving as the research forest manager. The third adaptations to the structure are based on advisory group input and advice. And then another factor is ongoing conversations over a lead research partner, which remain ongoing. So the proposed structure in the document you have contains three relevant sections. The first is Section 1, which is the mission and management policies for the research forest, as well as the state land board's responsibilities. Section 2 is the department's roles and responsibilities, and Section 3 are the responsibilities of the new Elliott State Research Forest Board of Directors. The subject of an oversight structure for the research forest and this document itself has undergone significant vetting, input, and revision from the Elliott State Forest Advisory Group, which is the advisory group that DSL has formed based on land board direction for purposes like this kind of vetting. And that vetting was done at 4 meetings since this past February. And each of those meetings were all publicly noticed with agendas and meeting materials posted both before and after the meetings on the DSL Elliott website. And each meeting included public comment periods going back to February. And this has been an evolving iterative document that is finally landing in final form with the revisions on the screen. And also on the Elliott work plan brought to the land board back in February, we had noted and explicitly included this April meeting as the meeting at which the land board would be adopting or being asked to adopt the oversight structure. So there has been a lot of daylight on this, and I think finally, in light of that, there are a few proposed revisions to the oversight structure that go beyond what was originally contained in your land board packets. And these revisions stem from the advisory group's meeting last week on April 2nd, after your packets went out. So sorry for the disconnect on the timing of this, but it was motivated by wanting one final round of advisory group vetting and public input. And I'll walk through those brief revisions on the screen now, just to bring everybody up to speed with the current version. So if you turn your attention to the document, and I'll work to be brief on this. The first change is that the addition to the introduction to the document on page 1, and that really is to clarify and explicitly capture how any future changes to the oversight structure would occur, with the intent being anything related to the land board's role or the mission and the management policies would be subject to your review and approval as the state land board. And then when it comes to the department and new research forest board of directors roles and responsibilities, the intent is to not have to come back to the land board for direction on everything. And if the department and the research forest board can come to mutual agreement, and that agreement is consistent with your direction, the land board's direction, we could move forward, but we would notify the land board at its meeting after any mutual agreement as to what those changes are, to give you a chance to determine if our conclusion that those are consistent with the land board's direction, or in fact your conclusion as well. And then if there's a disagreement over a proposed change between the department and the public oversight, the LA State Research Forest Board, if we can't come to agreement, either entity reserves the right to come to the land board to sort out the policy guidance and resolution for the land board's authorities. So that's the first change. The other changes in this document, and I noticed one more, are spelling errors. We have a Hawkeye on the advisory group, and I'm thankful for that. So we'll make sure this is polished and spelled and grammatically correct before finalized. So the second relevant change to note for your attention is on page 3, and it's under section 1, subsection C, related to the land board's role in Elliott State Research Forest guidance and your decision responsibilities. And so we've struck the word guidance because it was used redundantly in the line where it's been struck, and then the subsequent line around policy guidance. The next change is on page 4, and it's relevant to the appointment process, and specifically to the issue of reimbursement of LA State Research Forest board members, where it was flagged for us that House Bill 2992 from 2021, which related to payment of per diem to qualifying persons serving on state boards. There was a question about whether that would apply to this board. And so we've added language here clarifying that we will comply with whatever the current law is, and we're working with DAS to ensure, if there are mandates or restrictions, that we're aware of those and we'll be complying with them through our work with DAS. So that's that language is to capture our future intentions there, that revision. And then finally, on page 6, under the Research Forest Board duties and responsibilities, the clarifications here are the advisory committee desired to make sure that everybody serving on the board, that the land board would be asked to approve in June, and anybody in the future being asked to serve on the LA State Research Forest Board, that they were all very clear on, we're doing this not just for current purposes and moments in time, but for potentially a long period of time. And they wanted to be clear that anybody being asked to serve on this board or considering serving on this board were clear on what their duties would be. And so the revision here is to clarify that everything in section 3, subsection 1 are mandatory duties of the board of directors, but unlike the subsection 2 below it, the board of directors need not wait to solicit public comment before advancing those duties. And also, if the Research Forest Board has no specific recommendation on a given item, that it could say as much and would not be, forced to make a recommendation. But that's now a shall, not a may, in terms of mandatory duties. The second revision below that in section 3, subsection 2 changes will to shall to update based on Attorney General manual preference towards the use of the word shall in situations like this.
I will tell you, we probably had a 30-minute conversation about may, will, and shall. So we settled on shall. As former legislators, that's all we see is may and shall. So when will came into the picture, I'm like, what?
Everybody back to good old days, and we had a fun time. We reached, I think the high point is the remainder of the revisions in this document are stylistic or to correct errors in lettering, use of capitals or small case. And that's it, really. I think we'll hear from a member of the advisory group, but I think at this point, those are the high points on the proposed revisions to what was otherwise included in your land board packet for consideration. And if there are any questions or concerns or clarification needs, I think that's where we are at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Brownscombe, and thank you, Director Walker. Why don't we hear from Melissa Cribbins, since she is was involved in these conversations. Melissa, welcome. Please just announce yourself for the record.
Thank you so much. Melissa Cribbins, Coos Bay, Elliott State Research Forest Advisory Committee member. Governor Treasurer Reed, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. As has been discussed, the advisory committee has reviewed these changes as well as the potential oversight structure. And we concur with the structure that has been put forward. We have spent extensive time discussing the document as well as the roles of each entity and the advisory committee document. The advisory board is working well together and I feel is making great progress. We still feel like there is an excellent opportunity here to move the Elliott forward, and we appreciate the opportunity to weigh in today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your service and all those who've been serving from several years now on the advisory to the Elliott State Forest. So before we go into other questions or comments, I'd like to call on, we had at least one individual sign up for public testimony, and my understanding that I inherited before I came onto this group, there were some structures put in place for public testimony, but I would allow, 3 to 4 minutes. I think, is it Mr. Zyback? Are you here in person? Yes, you are. Please come forward. How about we try to hit a 4-minute mark, and if you get a little long, you'll see us waving over here, but please welcome and introduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
I'm Bob Zyback, Program Manager for Oregon Websites and Watersheds Project, Inc. I want to say first off that you have a lot of letters from myself and others. They might be saying management plan, but they are instead against this document that you've just been reviewing. We think it's deck chairs on the Titanic. It's been going in a bad direction for many years, and we think it's just time to change course. The first time I testified on this was in February 14th, 2017. Kate Brown was the governor. Dennis Richardson was his Secretary of State. The mayor of Portland was the treasurer. Ed Ray was the president of Oregon State. Tom Mattis was the Dean of Forestry. Jim Paul was head of Department of State Lands. Chief Brainerd was chief of the Coquels, and Don Ivy, my friend, was chief of the Coos, Coquels. Everything has changed quite a bit since then, except we still have 400 or 500 people not working in the Elliott. We still have HCP that's been going on since 1996. My PhD is in the study of ecological history. And I can say with certainty that there's very, very little science to an HCP, unless we're counting political science. This is a method by which the government takes over control of state and private lands and our wildlife. So that's a problem on the Elliott that we've approached. So a management plan that could do research, provide jobs, and reduce the risk of catastrophic fire has been our proposal from the beginning. Now, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I've given out 3 different handouts here, and they've got tags on them. And page 5 is a series of photos of critical habitat and riparian zones. 2 minutes? Okay. So all the words are there. We don't have to explain it a lot, but the problem is this isn't critical habitat. It's not old growth. Marble murrelets live in the ocean. Page 8, the second stickered item, shows a graph of harvest levels and sales since the spotted owl was noticed on the Elliott. It shows HCPs and a lawsuit in 2012 and a gradual deterioration of jobs, income, with an increase in catastrophic wildfire risk. My PhD is in the study of Western Oregon catastrophic wildfires, and I've been studying the fire history of the Elliott since the late 1980s. And the final one, page 13, that shows you the age classes of the trees in the Elliott. You've been lied to repeatedly, so is the public, that there's 40,000 acres of old growth out there. You saw the pictures of the dead trees from 1890. What we have is 40,000 acres of plantation, and those should be converted to something useful, whether it's wildlife habitat or traditional patterns, rather than the biological desert it creates. Plantations are grids of monocultures that overcome wildflowers, songbirds, take away habitat. They're the exact opposite of biodiversity. They were planted specifically to create jobs and products, fiber. And so those 40,000 acres we think should be targeted, should have been targeted and converted to something more desirable. If it's critical habitat, then do that. If it's traditional patterns, do that. If it's more fiber and more jobs, recognize that and then manage accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zyback, for being here, and thank you for the materials for each of us. So very much appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to have an opinion.
Thank you. We will call you up if we do. Thank you very much. So before we take a motion, let's see what kind of questions we have. Mr. Treasurer.
Madam Chair, I don't think I have any questions. I've been, I was at that meeting. I was the treasurer in February 2017. A lot of other things have changed, but I've been part of this conversation from the beginning, and I really appreciate the way Mr. Brownstone pointed out that this question that we're considering today is not new. It's a solid and thoughtful evolution on a consistent path. We've been advancing elements of this proposal for 7 years, carefully and thoughtfully, meeting our fiduciary responsibilities and getting close to finalizing this in a way that I think is really going to be something we can be proud of, protecting our forests and using it in a way that can all be proud of. So I don't think we can let this languish get off track. So I'm ready to make a motion whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And I want to thank you. I know you have been involved in this issue for many years, as have a lot of folks, including Mr. Zybeck. And I'm probably the newest one to this conversation. As I look, first of all, I want to again thank the folks who have been on the advisory group. I did have a chance to review the written testimony that was submitted this morning. And I take very seriously the concerns about transparency and public process. I do feel comfortable with the process that has led us here, given the types of conversations that have been public, the conversations we've even had here on the land board since I've started here, continuing to talk about, we've taken, I think, methodical and measured steps meeting after meeting to have these conversations, to look at the oversight structure itself. I think it really does balance the need for what is the role of this board to give direction, and leaving it up to experts, both the agency and the members of the oversight group, the board, to have these conversations. We heard earlier from our legislators about, a science-based approach. I'm not a scientist, and I believe we will have at our next meeting to see who the potential appointees of the board would be. And I have confidence we're going to have some good names there that will actually address these issues in a scientific, thoughtful way. And that balance between the board and the land board in terms of who has what say over what, I think is well outlined in the document. I'm comfortable with the changes that came through from the advisory conversation, by the way, including the Scribners and making that clear. I think for the public, where I often go to is that first section that talks about mission and policies. If you read through those, and I think this goes to the journey that the treasurer alluded to, I think it's where we need to go and where there has been a lot of public discussion to get there. I'm not saying agreement, public discussion to, we don't ever have 100% agreement on anything in this world, but I think there's been a lot of discussion to get here. One of the things that I just would say is, as you look at the mission statement and the policy statements, we talk about forest health, climate resilience, carbon sequestration, which in my mind, sequestration is a broader term for storage and other things, the biodiversity conservation, the water quality, recreational opportunities, local economies. These are all the types of things that I think we can balance, that I think Oregonians want us to balance. And I do support where we are in moving forward. So with that, if there are no other questions or comments, I'd entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the recommendation, the adoption of the oversight and board of directors structure that we've seen, talked about already, and the affirmation of our intent to appoint board members at a future land board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. I will second that motion. Are there any objections to that motion? Seeing none, motion is approved. Thank you all for the work on this and really appreciate everyone. With that, we'll move on to the informational items. Now we're moving on to another item on the LA State Forest. We have an update. So,
all right.
Director Walker.
Thank you, Governor. And I appreciate that you recognize the other members of the advisory group. Teresa Bird has been a long-serving member. Dan Newton came on recently, Mike Kennedy, Bob Salinger, and Dr. Jack Williams. Some of those people are going off after 6 years. So we will be doing that robust recruitment. All right, we are on the next step of giving you an update on where we're at. We don't let moss grow under our feet. It does grow in the forest, but it does not grow under our feet here at the department. We have a lot going on, and so I'm anxious to share that with you today. We have 6 key components for establishing the Elliott State Research Forest, and Brett's going to go over those and the work plans in your packet. And mostly what we want to do is provide you with a high-level overview of our status, where we're at. Are we keeping the timelines? We've accomplished a substantial work and there's more progress coming. I also want you to know that I've reached out to the 5 Western Oregon tribes last month, and I reached out to them before, but this time I reached out to them because we're going into the forest management plan process. And I wanted to check in with them and see if they would like to be involved in that process in any way, by consultation or involvement in any of the meetings that we're going to have. I have my assistant Aaron is setting up meetings with the tribal chairs to try to set up one-on-one meetings to decide whether we have a full-on tribal council meeting or I just meet individually with the chairs at this point. But it really is important for us to continue that work with our tribal nations. And we're sensitive to the fact that the Hanas and the Kutch people, the Coos and the Lower Umpqua, they're original stewards of the land, now referred to as the Elliott, and descendants of those original stewards are enrolled in all of those 5 Western Oregon tribes. So we want to be as inclusive as possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brett. We've given you a bigger slide that doesn't have tiny print on it, though I did get new glasses this week and I can actually see. But with that, Brett, why don't you tell them where we're at?
Okay. Governor Kotek and Treasurer Reed, again, for the record, Brett Brownscombe, Elliott State Forest Transition Director. And a lot of what you have in your meeting packet and the memo with the Elliott State Research Forest update on this action or agenda item 7 covers where we are, but we did want to summarize this and try out a new fancy slide that wasn't so compressed with text. So the 6 components that you see in the left column are really the key pieces that need to be done before we feel the Elliott State Research Forest can be called. Here we are. We've got a research forest that's operating. The first one is the management structure with the shift to DSL as the manager of the forest. The first where we are on that essentially is we've drafted a structure through the advice and vetting with the advisory group in those public meetings. Staffing and translating key roles to a mix of FTE and then placing other key roles in the hands of existing FTE to use existing department capacity, and then other roles being contracted out with the private sector and others. We've delineated how we're planning to tackle that kind of management through a structure that's dispersed. We're not trying to do it all internally at DSL, but we do need capacity internally, and then there's a lot of capacity externally with good expertise to draw on. So we've drafted that structure, the staffing and translations in progress. The next steps on this are really related to the number 3 key action of budgeting for the next legislative session. And the other is the operations plan, which I'll touch on in item number 4. The second key action is, well, it was just before you. And so the oversight structure adoption is an important milestone in getting to the creation of the Elliott State Research Forest. It really speaks to that public accountability and oversight and engagement and transparency, those elements of a governance structure. The third key action here is business plan development. And the summary on where we are here is really, we had during this past legislative session, we appreciate where it landed because it did land with approval to appropriate the $4 million that was originally set aside for the Senate Bill 1546 management agency, instead appropriating those dollars for the same purposes around standing up and operationalizing the Elliott, appropriated those dollars to DSL. So we are now working on the spending plan for those dollars, plus the 2023 legislative session funds that we're also very thankful for in contributing towards how we stand up the management structure in the near term, including base operations costs, but paying for contractors as well as new FTE. We're working on a policy option package that will include the Elliott in our agency request budget. So this summer we would bring that forward. And then all of this really rolls up into a business plan that we will also be bringing forward to you this summer around how do these annual and biannual funding packages and that we're currently hitting, hit last year and then for the remainder of this biennium and then proposed for the next biennium. How does all that roll into what we need to do to cover the startup costs for the forest? So in other words, the time period between now and the time when the forest would begin generating revenue back to the department, whether through the sale of timber or carbon or other revenue sources. So that's that. The forest management planning action component is really two things. One is a forest management plan. And what we have right now is the good underlying work that Oregon State did. We have a really strong forest management plan that was drafted by Oregon State with a lot of underlying work, but in the context of Oregon State being the manager of the forest, and the reality is DSL will be the manager of the forest, and we're moving in a direction that adheres to the foundations, but is going to be different than, tight adherence to just we can't formally just adopt that Oregon State plan given where things are headed. And so our job right now is to get a draft out this month to begin the public review process. So I don't know if there's confusion, but reading through the public comments that came in, we'd like to be very clear that has not started yet. We haven't put out a draft. There will be a full public process with a lengthy public comment and engagement period. We are, as Director Walker noted, outreaching specifically to tribal governments now that we're pivoting to the forest management plan, the DSL forest management plan, and then to other state agencies and governments too for input. So that process will begin this month. And then related to that, we have an operations plan being developed, and we've hired a contractor to do that. And Vicky gets excited about this and can elaborate more. But the intent really is to have, while we're doing a forest management plan, to also have an operations plan that would be for the 2025 to 2027 period. It would really, it's more detailed as to where and what we'd be doing on the ground when the light turns green and we have a habitat conservation plan with permits and ideally an approved forest management plan. Our intention is to begin active management on the Elliott in 2025. And so that operations plan is really relevant to that.
And I'll interrupt here and let you know, yes, I am very excited about it. The Elliott has been dormant too long. We've hired Eric Farm Unlimited, and Eric was, if you'll recall, Governor, you weren't here then, but he was one of our original members on the advisory group. And then he left about a year into it and went to work for OSU to help them work on the forest management plan and all those things. So he knows the forest intimately. It was a robust RFP. And so we scored him and awarded him the contract. I called him the day that came in and he agreed. And so I'm very excited. Have you met? You and Ryan are meeting with Eric soon. Oh, tomorrow. There you go. Because I'm ready to start working in the forest and cutting our first tree. Mr. Singleton and I are arguing about who gets to cut the first tree. I think Brett made the comment that we just get one of those long saws of the old days and we can all get on there. But we are all going to invite you. Yeah, we're all going to invite you to, because this is a working research forest. So there will be tree cutting. There will be also trees collecting carbon, and there's all kinds of things going on in this fabulous forest, but at least we're going to do something more than watch them grow. So I'm excited. Back to you.
Back to the work plan. We have it. So the next piece on the work plan is the habitat conservation plan. And I think the key thing noted last meeting, land board meeting, is we have submitted, according to our deadline, revised over time, but we have submitted the final HCP to the federal services. We're still in the negotiation process over where that comes out, but our belief is we've meaningfully addressed the federal comments that we received on the draft, and we've also responded to tribal consultation input that we've had over time, as well as advisory group input and revisions and public input over time. And we feel like we're in a good place. That said, there is a federal consultation request by the on the habitat conservation plan by the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Loronqua, and Sayustla Indians, and that federal consultation process is specific to the federal government and tribal nations. And what that does to our timeline and the process is still a bit unclear, but we're working on that. I think that on the HCP, the trajectory still has us on receiving permits and finalizing that process this year, probably at Q4 later this year. But relevant to back to the forest management plan, the forest management plan is really the space where we can work and focus on elements and values of forest management that are not Endangered Species Act specific, which is the Habitat Conservation Plan. The FMP allows us to articulate how management will achieve broader objectives around biodiversity, but also carbon sequestration and storage, broader values for recreation, education, and that, you know, the values people tie to forests that are not specifically just the critters. The last bit on the work plan update is the research, well, partnerships, and that includes ongoing work with Oregon State. So we are in conversation with Oregon State about the question that needs to be resolved around who the research partner will be on this forest. The direction's been from the land board to look to OSU first. We're doing that while we're working on the forest management plan. Where that lands is still to be determined. I think, as you may have heard during the legislative session, Oregon State is looking to clarify certain questions and get information, while we're also looking to continue for our own purposes on clarifying where we're headed with the FMP and other components. Broader partnerships with tribes, those conversations are ongoing. We remain in consultation with the CT Klutzy. And then, as Director Walker noted, we've done formal outreach to the other 4 Western Oregon tribes around their desired engagement and our desire to make sure we're engaging at levels and ways that those tribes want around the FMP, the Forest Management Plan. And then finally, there are other partnerships of interest on the Elliott, whether they be at the local level, tied to watershed associations, or at the statewide group level, and then also partnerships related to the potential of Shutter Creek as the Elliott's headquarters, and that work remains ongoing as well. So that's all I have. Open to any questions and feedback and direction from you all, but Director Walker or Governor, I'll hand it back to you.
I think that covers it. We have 2 more agenda items, so I don't really have much more to add. I think Brett's done a great job of characterizing where we're at.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Director Walker. Mr. Treasurer, any questions or comments?
Oh, keep going.
The only thing I will say is I really appreciate the approach with the work plan, the clear deliverables. It's a lot operating all at once. We have multiple things going on here. I think the next 6 months, obviously through the end of the year, will be very busy. And I share the director's desire to keep going forward so we can get down to business. And I do appreciate the outreach to all of the tribes who have ancestral lands connected to the Elliott. And making sure we, understand where everyone is on those topics as well. So with that, we really appreciate the informational and keep going. A lot of hard work. Eat your Wheaties. Let's get it done. So thank you. Director Walker, we'll go on to the next item.
All right. thank
Informational
you.
item on the legislature.
Sure, I'll have Chris Costelli, our legislative government relations manager, come on up and give us this brief report. It was a short session, but a lot happened. Thank you, Brett.
Well, hello. Good morning, Governor Kotek, Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Chris Costelli, and I'm the Government Relations Manager here at the department. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm going to walk you through our brief legislative update for the 2024 session this morning. As you would expect or hope from a short session, we didn't have any major policy bills that directly impacted the department. Nevertheless, there were some bills we tracked and did have impacts, and some reports we submitted that are worth mentioning today. So let's start with the money bill. Senate Bill 5701 was the omnibus budget reconciliation bill for mid-biennium adjustments. I'm going to just paraphrase this because you have the memo, but for the department, the bill provided roughly $4.4 million for DSL's modern permitting and information system project that's known internally as OWLS. It also provided roughly $572,000 to the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. The department provides administrative support to the OOST, and the board appoints the non-legislative OOST members, which I think you guys did just a few meetings back. The bill also increased other funds to Shutter Creek, the former site of Shutter Creek Correctional Institution, by $500,000. I think Brett mentioned that in one of his updates, or at least the site. And it provided a general fund appropriation to the Elliott State Research Forest of roughly $4 million. So we're going to give a quick update on some policy bills that passed as well. Senate Bill 1573 was the omnibus housing bill, which passed last session. The bill did a number of things, but of particular note to DSL is the one-time addition that cities can go forth with regards to urban growth boundaries. The desired result of the bill is increased housing production and UGB expansions. As such, we anticipate additional demand for DSL resources around wetlands planning, assistance, review of local wetlands inventories, wetlands land use notices, and wetland delineations, and removal fill permitting and mitigation. I think that's a reasonable expectation. With that said, we did not receive any funding for that work through the bill. We will be tracking the implementation of this bill closely and may need to request additional resources in the future so we can keep up our part of that process. House Bill 4132 requires the Department of Fish and Wildlife, their commission, and DSL to implement the Ocean Policy Advisory Council's recommendations to develop an adaptive management and social monitoring program to support marine reserves. Again, just want to note that we did not receive any funding for this work. Our expectation is that ODF&W, who did receive positions in funding, are carrying out the bulk of that work, with DSL playing a supporting role as needed, which we are happy to assist with. House Bill 4080 was the offshore wind energy bill. It declares a state policy that the interconnection of offshore energy projects be carried out in a manner that promotes electric grid reliability and resilience. The bill has several tasks and report requirements for Department of Land Conservation and Development, their commission, and ODO. Again, DSL has a supporting role in the implementation of this bill and its successful completion, and we look forward to helping our state partners with that. And lastly, we're just going to briefly note Senate Bill 1576 was a recreational immunity bill. It adds some limited immunity for improved paths, trails, roads, and other right-of-ways used to access land for recreational purposes. And it adds walking, running, and bicycling to the list of outdoor activities included in the definition of recreational purposes. That language, the protections, and the additions to the definition will provide additional protections to DSL and other state landowners, along with cities, to we manage a lot of lands for the people of Oregon. We don't have a lot of developed recreational trails and paths, with the exception of the South Slough, which I understand you guys are will all be going to in August. I hope you get to enjoy those facilities then. DSL submitted 2 required reports to the Legislative Assembly in 2024. We submitted a legislative update on the Abandoned and Derelict Vessel Program and Fund, and you'll get to hear more about that program framework in a second. And that was pursuant to House Bill 2914 from the 2023 session. And we submitted a legislative report on the Elliott State Research Forest for Senate Bill 1546, which passed out of the 2022 legislative session. Your offices should have received a copy of both reports. Please let me know if it didn't, and we will get you one as soon as possible. In closing, we had an opportunity to meet with many legislators to discuss constituent questions and concerns, which is always one of my favorite parts of working down there, is just talking to people about what we do, why it's important, and seeing how we can help with different issues. We also had an opportunity to start talking with some legislators about our possible 2025 legislative concepts after you approved us to move forward with those at the February Land Board meeting. So thanks for your time today. And with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Castelli. Really appreciate that. Lots in the short session. Mr. Treasurer, any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. And nice job on the reports to the legislature. They're really well done.
Great, thank you.
With that, we'll move on to the next informational item,
All right.
which
This
is
will take us home.
abandoned and derelict vessels.
This will take us home. And I want to, while Josh is coming up, I want to make sure we're very clear about which part of the Common School Fund this money comes from. I saw Mr. DeVore kind of wince a little bit. There are 2 parts. There's the constitutional fund and there's a statutory fund. We always use the statutory fund for these purposes. That's our goal. So that's the difference. All right. So I'm really pleased to announce this item. We have to close at noon, so I'm not going to take a lot of time. Other than to say, you asked us for immediate action. We got to work and we've done it really well. I'm so impressed. We got the money. We got the outline of a program. And as you saw today from our 2 legislators, they were big champions for that. So I'm just wanting to introduce Josh Mulholland. He is our new Waterways Stewardship Manager. Yeah, I'm glad she put that in there because I forget what your title is. Basically, he joined us from the Marine Board and he knows all about abandoned and derelict vessels. And he's going to talk to you about all these cool things we have done since this came about. So Josh, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much, Vicki. Good morning, Governor Kotek, Treasurer Reed. For the record, my name is Josh Mulholland. I am indeed the Waterway Stewardship Program Manager for the Department of State Lands. I'm excited to share with you the department's work on this complicated topic of abandoned derelict vessels in Oregon and on Oregon waterways, and the work that we've done over the past year, which included very collaborative process with partners to develop a guiding framework for this new program at DSL. So I'm going to briefly touch on the process that we use to seek input and inform this framework that I'm going to present, and then share with you those high-level topic areas contained within that framework. And then I'm going to conclude with some of the specific challenges that we've identified with this ADV work group that we've convened and are looking to address through a proposed legislative package for the next session. And I'm also going to give you a very brief overview of a few situations of considerable concern that program staff are seeking to address in the short term. So in the summer of last year, we conducted dozens of interviews with those that had valuable perspectives about how the state should deal with this problem of ADVs. That work informed the creation of the previously mentioned work group of over 24 members. to inform this comprehensive program framework and to help us determine our priorities and where we should focus our efforts. The work group has met 9 times, meets again next week, and the details that I'll be sharing today are in many ways a result of that continued collaboration with that group. Before I move on, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you truly to those members who volunteered a not insignificant amount of time to help inform our efforts. So after collaborating with that work group on the framework creation, we solicited feedback on the vision for the program to gain a broader understanding of what the public thinks of what we're planning to do. We received some great considerations, and we will consider those as we implement and put kind of meat on the bones of the framework that we've established. So next, I'm going to provide an overview of the framework items that are contained in much more detail in your meeting packets. My goal is to give you just a sense of what the program focus areas are and what some of the work looks like contained within each one. I'm starting with the use of the ADV fund because that's the single thing that stakeholders and partners indicated that they cared about most and want to see leveraged to address the state's most pressing ADV problems. And one challenge that became abundantly clear is that all jurisdictions that may be forced to deal with an abandoned derelict vessel need a low barrier mechanism to access funds for a department-approved ADV response. So what we're doing is identifying the appropriate mechanisms to allow funds from the ADV account in the Treasury to be used by other entities such as local governments, other state agencies, public ports. We're also examining what qualifying criteria should be considered in determining eligibility for use of the ADV fund and the form that these agreements might take, including grants, reimbursements, whatever makes that easiest on them so that we can all reach our common goal. So for example, the photo on this slide is a vessel that was abandoned at the Charleston Marina in the Port of Coos Bay. The owner of this boat is gone and out of the picture in every sense. And so no one is left to maintain this vessel physically or legally. And now it's a problem for the marina. This is a situation that is not at all uncommon. An example where assistance from the ADV program is certainly desired and will be considered for its priority in the overall interest and benefits to the state as a whole. A very related challenge is that no dedicated funding stream for handling ADVs in Oregon exists. This has led to very commendable but incohesive efforts among different state agencies as well as more local entities to address ADVs, but there hasn't been a cohesive effort up to this point. And a lot of that's because of a lack of consistent and predictable funding. Therefore, we're committed to exploring the viability of sources of funding that both the department and the work group have been looking at and identified, including established mechanisms involving waterway users like marina leases or recreational boat registrations. However, we are also committing to pursuing federal aid to the maximum extent possible through opportunities such as the NOAA Marine Debris Program. And actually, the photo on this slide is a vessel that was removed from the Port of Newport with assistance from that NOAA program. And we are very optimistic that we will be able to leverage many more federal aid dollars for situations like this going forward. Another needed component of the department's approach is a system for documenting and comparing known hazardous vessels. And the public very much wants an avenue to help us populate that database. We also want this system to be transparent for the public so that we can demonstrate our current priorities as it pertains to ADVs and hold ourselves accountable for responsibly utilizing program funds. So what we're working on is establishing a central repository for ADVs and other vessels of concern and a mechanism for receiving reports from the public and partner jurisdictions, similar to the interface shown here. This is from the state of Washington's ADV program. This type of GIS system not only allows the public to view basic information on vessels, they're on our radar, so to speak, but also aids us in our prioritization by cross-referencing vessel locations with other important geospatial data, essential salmonid habitat, to give you an example. Up to this point, a challenge for the state as a whole was that there hasn't really been a state expert on ADVs or even one go-to agency for a local government to contact when they found themselves having to seize, remove, dispose of a discarded watercraft. And it's evident that the state absolutely needs this. And we're committed to being just that, because navigating the laws and procedures associated with ADVs can be incredibly complicated. For any government entity, legally seizing a vessel so that it can be disposed of is complicated. Determining ownership and liability for a vessel can be complicated. Finding a contractor that is willing to do that salvage work and dispose of a vessel legally can be very difficult. We see that we can be very helpful in addressing ADVs, even in situations in which where no financial commitment from the program is provided. And I think that's a great example of the need for this program here at DSL. Another unfortunate reality is that there will always be some level of need for government capacity for removing and disposing of ADVs. There are literally hundreds of thousands of boats in the state. And the unavoidable truth is that a portion of those will become a burden to someone other than the owner at some point. People's situations change, people pass away. A boat's value is rarely commensurate with the liability that it can pose. However, we do believe that we can make progress in the realm of ADV prevention. And what I mean by that is preventing vessels from becoming a burden or an obligation to the state or others that might have management responsibilities on the water. So, for example, the photo on this slide is a real life example of a boat currently for sale in Oregon, at least current as of last month when we put this slide together. Note the price of $100 and the disclaimer on the ad. Can't take care of it anymore. Need to get rid of it, must leave my moorage. Now, we at DSL, I can't make this boat stop existing, but this represents an opportunity where intervention could be warranted. We're exploring the development of a turn-in system in which boat owners could relinquish their boats to us, as opposed to essentially dumping them on someone else. In a situation like the one shown, removal of this vessel in its current condition could be achieved for a fraction of the cost of raising this boat after it sinks from a busy public dock. The next component of the program where we know work is needed is on the disposal front. Determining the correct and most environmentally friendly practices for disposing of big, complicated, sometimes very hazardous waste is a challenge. Right now, we're working to gain a complete understanding of the regulatory structure and how it pertains to this work so that we can ensure that those that we contract with are proceeding with dismantling and disposing of vessels in the correct way. But we also want to be a resource for not only our contractors, but other partners and the public at large regarding the environmentally conscious and legal watercraft disposal. You'll see on this photo, Tiffany, which you'll recall was removed by the department last year. As you'd expect, a complicated project like removing this boat involved a whole lot of cooperation with state partners, federal partners. And if you recall, this was a 200-ton ADV with extremely high levels of PCBs and lead, and it was pulled from the Columbia River in Astoria. Should I wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna, as you might expect, and there's more in your packets, the outreach and education is obviously going to be a program component, as I think you would expect, and as well as process and procedure improvements. Again, there's some more details in the packet, but looking at laws that were written quite long ago, dealing with a reality quite different than ours now. It's just time for some of those to be revisited with the idea of efficiency and also fiscal responsibility, making sure that the money that we spend to address situations is spent to best address the situation and not processes that were put in place to address a different reality. So again, you can contact me with some if you're interested in some other vessels that we're looking at, given the time frame. I'm going to go to the end slide. To put it lightly, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Representative Gomberg, Senator Taylor kind of articulated that earlier today. I think the work that this work group has done, the program has done right now, highlights the need for the program now and in the future. And I think implementation of the aspects that some of which I talked about today, some of which kind of glossed over it, but I think that will return the state's waterways to a condition that we feel like we can be proud of. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the no time that we may have left.
He was worried he wasn't going to get to share all the work that they've done. And it has been tremendous. As you can see, Appendix A is the framework and Appendix B is the community engagement report, how much we have engaged with the community and the responses. And people are truly engaged with what we're doing here. Our next, while we continue going through our framework, the next thing I have for the land board is that I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to board one of these large abandoned and derelict vessels so you understand the breadth of the problem that we have. You won't need to wear a life vest, but we have one in particular that we're looking at now. So there are several. We have no shortage of boats to go after, and Josh showed me all the pictures. So if you want to see them, he's happy to share them. But we are very busy working on this program and making sure we restore Oregon's waterways to everyone. So thank you, Josh.
Director Walker, and welcome, Mr. Mulholland, to your new responsibilities.
Thank you.
And the reports are really good, and I have thoughts, but I will share them offline later. So, Mr. Treasurer, any comments, questions?
Madam Chair, yeah, I do a question, but first to note that Director Walker seems to have plans for us between boarding boats and trees.
I'm counting on some field trips. Yes.
Mr. Mulholland, glad you're here. Since you're here, I can't resist picking up on a theme that you touched on. I was really struck by the idea of being preventative, finding those opportunities when we can identify a risk preemptively. What are the other things, even before a boat gets to the situation you described or demonstrated with that ad? We've talked in this setting before about insurance requirements. What other things are on your radar in that regard?
Certainly private boat insurance is absolutely on our radar. I can tell you it's been a considerable topic of conversation at those work group meetings, as well as an internal focus for the program. As we consider how it fits into the state's overall, holistic approach to addressing ADVs, one of the challenges that we've found is kind of insurance products that would provide relief in the situations that we sometimes encounter are not necessarily readily available in Oregon or elsewhere. Those policies that would take care of raising and properly disposing of a boat. But we continue to talk with multiple insurance providers on what regulations could need to be in place before those products become more available in the state. And then there's also the challenge that we've seen of the boats that we end up encountering, dealing with, they have been neglected and haven't been legally maintained for years and years. So we're not just any kind of boat insurance, but boat registration, mortgage requirements, depending on where they are. So to make a long answer, to bring it to a close, we think it absolutely fits into the overall framework of the state's approach. We don't see it as the one kind of silver bullet, but we certainly see it fitting in some way, shape, or form as we kind of build out our again overall approach.
I'd be impressed if you had a single silver bullet, whatever it was. I guess the other obvious thing that occurs to me as you're talking is the notion of whether the state could have insurance too, much like we have had in the case of wildfires. So look forward to hearing more about those.
Thank you, Treasurer.
I would agree that both the cleanup and the prevention side, right? I had to say, well, I have $100, maybe,
There's a boat in Goble for you.
Responsible for it, Madam Chair.
I have to respond. But I mean, getting those plans where, the cost benefit of not having it sink is substantial, right? But how do we build those relationships with owners who just can't maintain them? So,
Also building out the locations of where we can deconstruct these boats too. We have our Tongue Point location that our department actually was helpful, and Business Oregon was helpful in Hayek Maritime, getting them necessary things.
Really good jobs, really good economic development.
Yeah.
Having more than one, that the Tongue Point site is quite impressive, and be good to have one on, a lot more of those opportunities further down the coastline too. So.
Yep. That was the first place former Senator Betsy Johnson grabbed me by the arm and said, "We got to go." So that's my first action as a director of the agency. We went out to Tongue Point. But again, I want to thank Kate McCusker, our one of our communications officers. She's our community engagement officer. She put this report together. She's done a ton of interviews. And Dorothy Deal also joined us from the Marine Board on this program. And Josh has just been terrific. So we expect to do even more. And we've done a lot in a very short time.
Yes, you all have. We're on the cusp of more. So we really appreciate that. And it is a very nonpartisan issue. Right?
Yeah.
For folks, we just want our waterways to be cleaned up. So thank you for that. That was our final informational item on the agenda. Was there anything else, Director Walker?
No, I was instructed to try to get you done by noon. So I made Josh cut his thing short. No, I had no others today because I knew it was a big agenda. I'm sorry, we've never had so many big agendas, and I think it's going to continue for a while. So
all right, we're up to it. It's all good. We're here to work. So, well, thank you all. If there is nothing else, I will adjourn the State Land Board meeting for April 9th, 2024. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.